And so I'd like to get us started. And we had a request from Dr. Torre-Bueno to make a short presentation this morning about something that he is working on. And so I'd like to kick it off with him. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Um, I'm Jose Torre-Bueno. I'm the head of the Center for Community Energy. Um, Maybe actually, let me just start with a quick announcement about Center for Community Energy, because on the 12th of next month, let me share my screen. The 12th of next month, we're putting on a conference on vehicle to grid and its ability to mitigate the duck curve. And that's free for everybody. You just have to register, and you can get to that by going to centerforcommunityenergy.org. I hope everybody's seeing my screen now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good, okay. Anyway, but that's just an announcement. What I wanted to talk about today was a emerging proposal for withdrawing CO2 from the atmosphere. This whole thing about CO2 drawdown is a little bit controversial, because some proposals for pulling down CO2 almost seem like greenwashing, because they don't seem very practical. But there's an interesting proposal that's been put forward that I want to discuss, because it's really it's closer to the proposals to use trees, because that's a natural it's the way CO2 is normally drawn out of the atmosphere, because it's an idea of accelerating another natural process. Um, Part of the carbon cycle of the Earth that's occurred long before humans existed. A lot of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, basically all of it before we came along, came from volcanoes. And part of the carbon cycle is that certain kinds of rock, when they are eroded into the sea, or actually erode onto beaches and then are ground up by the wave action on beaches, is when they get into the ocean and dissolve, they become they reduce the acidity of the ocean by reacting with hydrogen ions, and that has the effect of converting carbon dioxide into bicarbonate, which is eventually becomes calcium carbonate, which is absorbed by marine animals to form their skeletons, and then eventually they die and settle and become limestone. And in the fullness of time, that rises up again and winds up in volcanoes. And so there's a very, very long cycle of carbon dioxide, of carbon, through the Earth's mantle. And one of the kinds of rock that takes part in that is olivine. It's the more common one, but there's several kinds of rock that have the characteristic that when they dissolve in the sea, they absorb hydrogen ions, reduce the acidity of the ocean, and by doing so, effectively cause the ocean to absorb carbon dioxide and eventually sequester the carbon as rock. So some ingenious physical chemists recognized that if that process could be accelerated, it would be a more or less natural way to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So they created this concept called Project Vesta, and I'm going to just walk through their website, which is a very good analysis of this. The question is, could they accelerate the process? And the point is that most carbon dioxide in the Earth is in rock right now. And the process is the erosion of rock transports the certain kinds of rock into the ocean, and the critical issue here is that wave energy is what grinds up this rock. And the thing that distinguishes this this concept from other ideas about removing carbon dioxide is that most of the energy is going to come from wave action. So that the basic idea they have is that they're going to accelerate the natural erosion by mining olivine. Olivine is mined right now to make, actually, green sand beaches are those beaches where olivine is naturally eroded into the sea. But the concept is mine it on a larger scale than it's currently being mined, create more green sand beaches. Interestingly, the theory is that the reason there are ice ages is when the movement of continents causes more beaches, specifically green sand beaches, to be in the tropical zone, and more carbon dioxide is pulled out of the atmosphere, that tips the balance enough to have ice ages. So their concept is increase the erosion of olivine by mining olivine on a much larger scale than we do now, spread it on beaches to increase the number of green sand beaches, allow wave action to grind it up, and then there would be a faster absorption of carbon dioxide. And the calculation is that this could actually be done on a larger scale, and this would be at least supplementary to carbon capture in trees or via permaculture, and certainly less expensive than direct air capture that's been proposed as sort of with machines. And their calculation is that, most importantly, because most of the energy necessary to do this comes from wave action, and they've already demonstrated that it works, it would be significantly cheaper than any of the other things that have been proposed as a way to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Specifically, their calculations say that the price for doing it would be cheaper than the current price that, what am I trying to say? The current carbon dioxide price that they charge, for instance, in Europe, and which the US should be charging. And therefore, they could charge people for doing this and make it cost effective to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Anyway, so they're in the process of trying to do feasibility studies. They've proven this in the lab, and they're actually in the process of spreading olivine on beaches and doing the studies to show that it, A, it works, and B, that it doesn't have any, unintended side effects. In theory, by reducing the acidity of the ocean, it should counteract the bad effects we're already seeing with marine organisms being harmed by the rising acidity. So they expect it to have positive biological impacts. But anyway, it's an interesting project. It's in some sense a more natural way of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere than things that have been proposed with machinery. So I thought it was an interesting thing to make people aware of. Anyway, any questions about that? You're muted, Meryl.
I got
Go
it.
ahead, Neil. Go ahead.
Can I go ahead? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this past week we had a presentation from a Rotary group called Rotary Climate Action Team.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a guy on there, a astrophysicist named Peter Tchaikovsky, and he was talking about something called synthetic limestone. Now you mentioned limestone and everything. Have you heard about this synthetic limestone thing?
It's probably some other method of taking carbon out of the atmosphere and making limestone. Did he say how it was made?
Well, he talked about a lot of stuff. It's just that I kind of maybe tuned out or something. I didn't quite get it, how that's possible. So, but anyway, that's the idea.
I mean, limestone is partially carbon. It is specifically, limestone is calcium carbonate. So any method that causes limestone to come into existence will sequester carbon.
Okay.
The proposal here is that basically if you cause olivine to dissolve in the ocean, you cause this reaction that the olivine combines with hydrogen to form silicate, which precipitates, and the hydrogen reacts with water and carbon dioxide to form bicarbonate. Bicarbonate becomes carbonate. Carbonate combines with calcium ions to form calcium carbonate. That winds up in the skeletons of microorganisms or marine organisms and ultimately becomes limestone. So the one kind of rock dissolving in the ocean eventually creates another kind of rock. So this is a biological mechanism that creates limestone. He may be talking about some kind of industrial mechanism that creates limestone. But in either case, anything that creates limestone will cause carbon to be sequestered.
Right. Okay. You know, I thought that when carbon dioxide is absorbed in the ocean, that it causes acidification.
Yes, it does. Carbon dioxide combines with water to form carbonic acid, and therefore the ocean becomes more acidic.
Right.
Olivine reacts with hydrogen ions, that's what acid is, to form silicate. So it takes hydrogen out of the water and makes it less acidic.
Okay. Now this olivine, what exactly is olivine?
It's a kind of rock. It's a very, very common rock.
Okay. Right, got it. Okay. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So it's everywhere, the olive vine that can be found anywhere, that easily accessible.
Yes, the one of the things they've studied is what they've looked for. I mean, for this to be feasible, there has to be lots of accessible places where you could mine olivine that are close to beaches so that you could mine it and transport it with minimal cost. Because what they had to compute is, with the amount of carbon dioxide you'd release in mining and grinding and spreading olivine, be less than the amount of carbon dioxide that you'd release, it absorbed. And they've calculated that, yes, by a factor of 10. So because it turns out, because it's a very common kind of rock, there's plenty of places where you could mine olivine that are close enough to beaches that you could mine it and transport it and spread it with minimal transport costs.
I have a question. So what I don't understand though, with the vastness of the ocean, and you're doing this along the beaches, how does that reach into the,
Well, what happens is that the key idea here is that you're using the wave energy to grind this stuff up and it disperses into the ocean. And wherever it disperses into the ocean, once it becomes molecules, it reacts with the carbon dioxide in the ocean and causes the carbon dioxide to become sequestered. So for every molecule of this you get into the ocean, it absorbs 4 molecules of carbon dioxide.
I heard some a friend said that he saw some greenish rock along the southern California coast somewhere. Could it be olivine?
It might be. Olivine is a greenish rock. I mean, here's a picture of it in their thing. That's olivine.
Oh, look pretty.
There are other greenish rocks, but olivine is a greenish rock.
Mm.
But it's a pretty common rock. There are other rocks that have the same characteristic, that when they dissolve in seawater, they absorb hydrogen ions and therefore cause carbon dioxide to be sequestered as calcium carbonate. But olivine just happens to be the most common one and one of the easier ones to mine.
Oh, good.
I have a couple of questions before we move on. Jose, you mentioned a feasibility study. Do you have an idea as to how long that might take and how conclusive it might be. And in your opinion, if it turns out that it's a viable additional, thing that we can throw at mitigation, do you have a sense as to whether or not it will actually be pursued? I realize there are a lot of factors, but let's say based on the willingness of our current administration making good on their campaign promises, do you think this is something that could come to fruition? And the second question, which is somewhat related, is do you think that this might be something that, let's say, fossil fuel extractive industries might embrace as a way of basically taking the emphasis away from, us,
I
doing what
think,
really needs to be done?
well, let's start with the second question, because I think that's a very significant one. I think the fossil fuel industries are casting around for anything that would let them persist. And I think the whole drawdown thing has been, they've sort of glommed onto that as a, we'll keep doing it and later on we'll clean up after ourselves, right? And a lot of the mechanical proposals for we're going to build a giant machine and we'll suck the CO2 out at some point, I think suffers from that because they have a relatively low efficiency. So I think there's a lot of skepticism about any proposal to take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. On the other hand, I think that there's already such a mess that we probably aren't going to survive if we can't get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So it's a sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't. On the one hand, I don't think we can let them pull the argument that it's okay, just let us keep doing this because we'll clean it up later. But on the other hand, I think we do have to be prepared to clean it up because it's already past the point where we can avoid doing some cleanup. I think certainly that we should favor natural methods over industrial methods because they are less disruptive and more energy efficient, right? I mean, obviously trees are the ultimate example of that, right? You plant a seed and then it works on its own. This seems to me to be more in that vein of, just accelerating something that nature does anyway. I think a lot of the proposals for we're going to build a giant machine that's going to suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere seem hard to credit to me, that they're hard to believe that they could be made energy efficient. So I think it is a difficult thing because it has to be done, but it can't be allowed to be an excuse for not curbing emission, because by far the cheapest way to keep carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere is not to put it in the first place. As far as this group goes, they're so far they have not gotten any government funding. Everything they've got has been by begging for it. So their last page here is their begging page. I think, there's many people begging for money, and especially in the age of COVID, it's really, really hard. I think if they've gotten to the point of actually doing field studies, they've just started the field study. So I think they're probably months away from having results, or maybe a year. If they have good results, I think maybe they have a hope of attracting some government money. And the key thing is that their price per ton of carbon reduction, if it proves out in their field study, is much more attractive than any of the other proposals that have been made in terms of what it would take to get carbon out of the atmosphere. So if they can prove that out, it has some attractiveness to it. So
I think a segue to that is the work that you've been doing, Jose, on green hydrogen, that we need to, if it's transported, it shouldn't be transported with fossil fuel.
Yeah, let me, if you like, let me say a few words about that, because that's relevant locally. And that's relevant to a topic that's coming up in our local communities, which is building electrification. Solana Beach is trying to, many communities in California are trying to pass REACH ordinances requiring new construction to be all electric. And there's also a great deal of talk about hydrogen as a way of transporting and using green electricity. And in ways, that's a very promising thing, because there are certain places where there's no way to use electricity and there's no way to store electricity, and therefore hydrogen is a promising thing. On the other hand, I'm concerned about green hydrogen being used as a kind of greenwashing, specifically with respect to getting rid of natural gas, because there's been a certain amount of chatter of we're going to make the natural gas system green because we're going to mix it with hydrogen. And the issue there is that you can't mix hydrogen into the natural gas system above about 20% without replacing or converting all the appliances, because they can't burn more than about 20% hydrogen. So if a community is suggesting we're going to pass an ordinance that, we don't want hydrogen, we don't want natural gas in new construction, or even we intend to eventually replace, retrofit existing buildings to electricity, and the gas company is saying no need, we're going to have, we're going to be green, we're going to mix hydrogen into the natural gas system, that's really planning to fail, because they'll never go above 20%. So they're still going to be using natural gas. It's really not practical to use hydrogen in things like home heating or home appliances. It really makes much more sense to convert those to electricity. The role of hydrogen is probably going to be in industry, in things like heavy vehicles that aren't practical to run with batteries, in ships and aviation, which aren't practical to run with batteries, and things like steel making, where you need the hydrogen for chemical reasons. But the idea that you're going to preserve the natural gas system by just converting it to hydrogen is probably not realistic. I mean, the large natural gas pipes that bring hydrogen to industrial facilities maybe will be converted. And actually in Europe, they've been doing studies about this and figuring out what part of the piping system they can convert. But the millions of miles of small diameter piping that run into houses, it's probably not feasible to convert that to hydrogen. But I think there's a risk of hydrogen being used as a kind of greenwashing to delay electrification. And I see that as a risk of discrediting hydrogen in legitimate applications. So I think it's important that the green community not be sort of bamboozled, and also not turn against hydrogen in toto because it's being used for greenwashing. So I think that's going to be a big issue for debate. And actually, San Diego Energy District and the Center for Community Energy will probably be holding some webinars in the spring about green hydrogen. So
a couple of things to add to that is that Paris just spent $94 million by 2024 to put 10,000 Toyota green hydrogen taxis into Paris. And
that's interesting. Let me see.
The other thing that's happening is that the California Fuel Cell Partnership is putting in 700 green hydrogen electrolyzers for fuel cells. When people pull up and exchange the fuel cells, it only takes 5 minutes.
I'm not convinced that's for light duty vehicles. I'm not convinced hydrogen is a winning strategy. And if I may, let me share another image. Let me bring up something else. Here it is, okay.
Long Beach is the port of Long Beach is putting in green hydrogen.
Green
Semis.
hydrogen may make sense for heavy duty vehicles, but this is a diagram. Can everybody see this diagram?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a diagram about the efficiency losses as you go through the chain. If you're going to start with renewable energy and make energy for driving vehicles. And the way to read this diagram is if you start with a certain amount of renewable electricity and you convert it in different ways. So the first one on the left is I've got renewable electricity and I'm going to run an electric vehicle. So I distribute it and I lose a few percent. And then I charge a electric vehicle. I lose a few more percent because I get less out of the battery than I put in. And then I lose a few more percent because I converted it from AC to DC to AC. And then my electric motor is only 95% efficient. So from all the electricity I started with, 77% actually drives the wheels of the vehicle. And by 2050, the expectation is that, you know, as I get better at these various things, 81% of the electricity will drive the vehicle. So now let's consider if I'm going to use hydrogen to drive my vehicle. So first of all, I only get 76% of the energy when in hydrogen when I do electrolysis. And then I lose some of that when I transport and distribute hydrogen. Because for instance, I have a boil off issue when I transport hydrogen. When I convert the hydrogen back to electricity, I lose almost half of it because fuel cells aren't that efficient, right? And then again, I go through the same thing. I lose a few percent when I convert it to, and then the motor is still 95% efficient. But bottom line, I only wind up with 33% of my original energy driving my wheels. So the conversion efficiency, the two big hits I take are in the electrolysis and in the fuel cells, right? It's even worse if I want to convert to some other liquid. If I want to convert it to diesel fuel, I still have the loss of electrolysis. And then I have the loss when I synthesize fuel out of hydrogen, I lose another 30% or so. But then the thing is, a motor is way less efficient than an electric motor. An internal combustion engine is only about 36% efficient. In fact, a gasoline engine, as opposed to a diesel engine, is only 30% efficient. So the idea that we're going to synthesize diesel fuel or gasoline from electricity is hugely inefficient. So the bottom line is, basically, if I wanted to use hydrogen to drive vehicles from renewable energy, I basically would need twice as many solar panels as if I'm just going to make electricity and drive battery powered cars. So for very heavy vehicles where the batteries would be way too heavy, it may be plausible to drive them with hydrogen. But for light duty vehicles, it doesn't sound like it's ever going to make sense. So this business about hydrogen powered taxis, I just don't buy it. It doesn't seem like hydrogen is going to make sense, except if you just need a great deal of energy carried around in the vehicle. So that's my take on yeah.
Jose, thank you so much for all this valuable information, but I think we need to move on and give everybody else a chance. But would you please put the links to the event that you're doing on the 12th in the chat?
Yes.
And also, I would be happy to promote that on Facebook for you.
Thank you very much.